I do want to say to you that when I put the noodle in, I do not cook it first. That is way too much work. And you don't have to buy the one that says oven ready. Any lasagna noodle is oven ready. If you do it in such a way that you have enough moisture in there to hydrate the noodle and so that it gets cooked thoroughly. And what I've typically done is I layer my lasagna the day before, put it in the refrigerator overnight, and the next day I bake it. And there's enough moisture by then in the noodle to easily cook it. So, and when I'm layering the lasagna, and I haven't excelled in making my own sauce, I just buy a good one and use it. When I open the jar, first I shake it, I open the jar, and I put some in my lasagna dish. And then I take the dish and I go like this. Because I'm not spraying my dish, I don't need to. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to avoid all that oil and to avoid the cleanup. And so I just put the tomato sauce in there and coat the bottom of my lasagna dish, and then I start layering. But after I've opened the spaghetti sauce, tomato sauce, marinara, whatever I'm using, and I've poured out a little bit, now there's some room in the jar, I like to use a little, this is a secret, I like to use a little salsa, mild, and put it in there. And usually those sauces are pretty thick, and I need it to go further, and I need it to hydrate those dry noodles. So then I add some more water, and I screw the lid back on, and I shake. And then I take the lid off, and I continue layering. And I put tomato sauce, the spaghetti sauce, before each layer of dry noodle and after each layer of dry noodle. Now, one person said to me when they saw this recipe, they said, I'm not doing that. Any recipe that long is too much work. And I said, no, this is lasagna for dummies. If you've never made lasagna, you just read this and you can make it. It's easy. And then you never need to read it again because it's so fun and it's so easy. But I just like to make sure I have enough moisture in my dish that it's going to cook the noodles. And now I need to tell you that the gluten-free noodle tonight is green lentil, organic green lentil lasagna noodles. It says oven ready, but like I said, it doesn't matter whether it says oven ready or not. You can do it the dry method. You don't have to cook the noodle first. And in the dish that was not, and this one's gluten-free. The green lentil is gluten-free. And you never know who you're feeding, so it's safe to do a gluten-free noodle. They have all kinds of rice noodles and other noodles, but I really like the green lentil. I do, however, have to order it from Vitacost online. It's hard to find. But the other lasagna dish that we did started out with green lentil noodles. So if you'd got the regular noodle or regular dish, you had a layer or two of green lentil in the bottom. Then you had a wheat noodle on top. And the wheat I like is by Bio Nature. The brand name is Bio Nature, and they make a whole wheat lasagna. They're made in Italy, and I find them delightful. And they're not any more expensive, I find, than other noodles. But you don't find them everywhere. So that is your lasagna. The lasagna has the cashew pimento cheese in it, and I make the cheese, and then when I go to layer the lasagna, I put in cheese in the tofu mixture with the greens and the seasonings. Everything is all stirred in there. And so that is the cashew cheese that you had in the taco salad. And so it's also good on pizza if you're using a non-dairy for pizza. The Cuban black beans, I never got that far. I just did black beans. Sorry about that. This recipe is really a yummy recipe for Cuban black beans. And so you might want to try that. The walnut maple cookie, you might recognize as Happy Cookies. I think Mrs. Neil Nedley made those famous in her book, Depression: The Way Out. And so people say, well, I want to be happy. Would you please make me happy cookies? And so tonight you're having happy cookies. I wanted to make them gluten-free. And so instead of using the whole wheat pastry flour that it calls for, I used almond flour. I'm seeing almond flour everywhere now. And so it's fairly available, and I just substitute it for the wheat. So it's gluten-free. And that's another easy thing you can do. We don't like to put the carob chips in the cookie and bake it because where the carob chip is touching the metal pan, it tends to burn. And so we just do the cookie, bake the cookie. When we take it out of the oven and it's still warm, hot, we press the little carob chips into the top of it. And they sort of melt there and find a nice home. So then I gave you, let me talk about your salad tonight. Do you recognize any of the dressing in the salad? It was a mixture. It was what we call our house dressing. When we had a restaurant, we were waiting, taking people's orders, and one guy came in and we said, what dressing would you like? And we had them listed, people could read it. And he said, oh, just give me the house dressing. I panicked. We didn't have a house dressing. I said to John, he wants house dressing. John said, give him some of both. We did, and he loved it. Everybody loved it. We started using it. Now we had a house dressing. First we would squirt lemon Italian, then we would squirt sesame tahini. But we never mixed them together ahead of time because we didn't know, sitting together over time in the refrigerator, if it would change the flavors. We could do research, right? But who has time for that? So we always have lemon Italian. We always have sesame tahini. We can squirt one, squirt the other, and we have house dressing. We really like the flavors together. So that's why you're having that tonight. Plus, we wanted to be able to give you plenty of beans. So you have kidney bean in your salad tonight. You could put all kinds of beans in your salad. You could put garbanzos, and you could put pinto or anything. By the way, what kind of bean did you have last night? Yeah, it was a pinto bean. Yeah. I was going to do cranberry, but I didn't get them done. Have you tried cranberry? A lot of times it's hard to tell a cranberry bean from a pinto bean, but they're a little bit different color, and if you're a real connoisseur, it may be a little bit different flavor too. All right, I gave you some recipes that I did not bring you a taste sample of just because I love these recipes, and I think you will too. I gave you a recipe for banana nut bread or muffins. The reason I like this one, this was a person who attended one of our programs, and she did this and brought it to a supper club follow-up. And what she used in her banana nut bread was 1 apple cored and chopped into small pieces, including the skin. I like that. Another way to get fiber. Leave that skin on the apple. If it's not organic, wash it good and pray. But get that fiber. And so you put this diced apple, into the batter and bake it, and it makes the most wonderful juice to moisten the muffin. And or you can do it as bread, either one. And that is another recipe that calls for whole wheat pastry flour. I haven't played with it for gluten-free yet, but Sharon asked tonight about what is whole wheat pastry flour. Pastry flour is made from soft wheat. There's hard wheat and there's soft wheat. Hard wheat is for making bread. It has plenty of gluten in it to work up and make bread rise and be wonderful. Soft wheat is grown specifically to make things like pasta, like noodles, or to make cakes, or to make cookies. And so if you get soft wheat or soft flour, don't try to make good bread with it, unless you're making biscuits or something of that nature, but not good homemade bread, not the kind that you're going to slice. So pastry flour is made from soft wheat, not hard wheat. On the air-popped popcorn, we just love our air-popped popcorn, but what makes the salt stick, or what makes we like to use nutritional yeast flakes a little bit on ours too. What can you have that makes it stick? And what we found was, remember when the craze was, you don't get enough omega-3, so you need to take a tablespoon of flaxseed oil every day. Have you ever taken a tablespoon of flaxseed oil? I mean, it's not the most fun, in my opinion, but it's really good on air-popped popcorn. And if you buy Barlean's brand, Barlean's flaxseed oil, they have the high lignin or the regular. We get the high lignin. Lignins are the fiber of the flaxseed. And if you buy the one that has high lignin, you can feel real good about that because you have to shake it. So you get more exercise. You have to shake it because the lignins want to settle to the bottom. They're a little heavier, but they're worth shaking for because they are protective for breast cancer for women. And men will just benefit across the board. The flaxseed, Barlean's comes in a bottle that you have to squirt to get it to come out. Am I taking too long? No. I thought I told them what lignins were. Thank you, Sharon. Anyway, the Barlean's comes in a bottle that you have to actually squirt it to get them to come out. You can turn it upside down and nothing happens. You have to squeeze the bottle just a little. That's wonderful because it can control how much you put on. And all we do is we have a bowl of popcorn that we just air popped. We shake our flax oil, and then we turn it upside down and squirt around in a circle. And then, I wish I had a bowl. I didn't think to bring one. I'm going to lay the mic down. Take the bowl and we flip it a couple of times. And it turns the popcorn over. No, I'm finished, thanks. It shakes the popcorn. And so I shake it until all the popcorn looks white because it was white to start with. But when I put flax oil on it, it turned beautiful, yellowish brown, like butter, and tastes like butter too. Then I have flipped it, and now I squirt once again because I want it throughout the popcorn bowl. I want flax on as much as I can without overdoing it. My husband says I overdo it. And so after I have the flax oil on the popcorn, then I have some salt that is powdered salt. It's not anything but salt, but I buy it. It's extra fine, and I can put it in a little shaker bottle, and I shake that on the popcorn. And then I have nutritional yeast flakes, and they come as flakes. And when I used flakes, they were always in the bottom of the bowl, and they're kind of expensive. So I put them in the flaxseed grinder, also known as a coffee grinder. I put them in the grinder and made powder out of my nutritional yeast flakes and put them in a little shaker bottle. So now I shake the nutritional yeast on top, and where the flax oil is, it holds on to all those flavors. And so we enjoy our popcorn knowing that we're getting our omega-3s without taking a tablespoon of flax oil straight. So I recommend air-popped popcorn. And the other thing about using flax oil on your popcorn is flax oil is very fragile, and you don't want to cook with it. Ideally, you don't want to cook with it because it makes it less digestible. And so if you put it on the popcorn, you're going to eat it in its raw state, and that's better for you. Absolutely. I knew. The high-fiber gelée parfait is a treat and a treatment. We use fruit juice to make it, and we use a mixture of equal amounts of guar gum and psyllium seed powder. And what they do is I blend it into the fruit juice, and it causes it to thicken like a Jell-O. The guar gum and the psyllium seed are wonderful fiber. And so, have you ever heard of that tea that you can get? It's a really nice tea. It's called Smooth Move. Well, it makes for a smooth bowel movement. Who's laughing? I loved it. And so the gelée parfait we use for patients who need help having a smoother move. And it's remarkable. And yet it tastes like dessert. We actually used to take it to fellowship meals and serve it as dessert. And we would even dice apples and stuff into it so they had to chew. And people just thought it was wonderful. It was like Jell-O. But it was real good and healthy. Well, we never gave anybody constipation. Gave anybody diarrhea. But, so, that's it for tonight. But one thing I forgot to say one other night, I'd like to say. When you make waffles, they make wonderful travel food. If you have to go in the car somewhere, just grab a few waffles in a Ziploc bag, and you will not be sorry. You don't have to have peanut butter on it. You can just eat it plain. The children will enjoy it, just plain. Or you can take your jar of peanut butter and a banana and put on it. But waffles are great travel food. And if you have a gluten-free person, you can make your waffles using gluten-free, certified gluten-free waffles and share them with your friends. So I just wanted to say that about the waffle being good travel food. We've taken them on the airplane. When they used to feed you on the airplane. They don't do that anymore. And so part of our travel food is waffles. Are there any questions about tonight or any time? I have a Black & Decker, and I like the small holes. And that's the reason I like the small holes is because the big holes get too much peanut butter and too much maple syrup. And so I like the small hole, and I have to go online and order one. I can't find it in the stores. You can find them in a secondhand store sometimes, and they haven't hardly been used because people don't make waffles anymore. But they're so wonderful. And so if I find one in a secondhand store and it looks really good, and usually they look new because nobody used it, take it home, wash the plates really good. They come out, they lift out. Wash the plates really good, put them back in, plug it in, and let it get really hot to burn off, any of the soap or whatever might be there. Then make a waffle, feed it to the dog. If the dog doesn't die, you're good to go. But seriously, I have gotten them in secondhand stores, and they were in perfect condition. And it was a Black & Decker with the small holes. People tell me that my recipe doesn't work very good in the Belgian. I don't know because I don't have one. So, but don't be surprised if yours doesn't. Sorry. All right, John, how much of your time did I take? Did you answer all the questions? I think so.
Yeah, I told her, you gotta have to be careful about making that little joke about the dog because, people love their dogs, and we wouldn't want to offend anybody. And then a while ago, I made that little smart remark, and I realized I might have offended somebody there. My apologies when I said you don't have to have any oil. That was supposed to be humorous. Okay, I need to ask if any of these people are here and I don't know who you are. Is Linda Kirk here? No. Okay. There you go. Could have asked Dr. Kathy. Is Jeff Kuhn here? No. Okay. Is Roger Anderson here? Ah. How did I miss you? So, all right. I have a couple of handouts for others, but that's for later. Okay, so tonight we're going to do 3 things. We're going to, shortly we're going to show a video that's a lecture on hypertension, and the second part of the lecture is actually on protein, because a lot of people get concerned about whether if you eat mostly plants, you can get enough protein without having all that steak and so forth. And before that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about hypertension. Anyway, then we're going to have what shall I say, a taking it home. Oh, hello, Rob. Your report is with your dear wife. Taking it home. In other words, we're going to be having another blood test here on the 30th. And there's no point in getting 2 blood tests if nothing changed. So if you find out after you hear the presentations that really there's nothing here that you would see yourself doing, it might be a waste of time to get another blood test. But if you are making changes and trying them out, which is what we recommend, then it'll be really good to get another blood test so you can see, is this actually doing anything or am I just killing myself? Like Dr. Deal likes to say, he says, does a healthy lifestyle actually make you live longer, or does it just seem longer? And so I urge them to get the blood test within 2 or 3 weeks, not waiting 3 months, okay? Because what happens is most of us, we would like to see progress sooner than that. So, and then at some point in here, I'm going to take general questions that you might have about anything that we've talked about. So let me just tell you a little bit about the anatomy and physiology of blood pressure. I know you're just anxious to hear this, but in all seriousness, it's fascinating. And they're going to talk about it on the video, a couple of very nice illustrations. But of course, we all know that we have a pump in our chest, the left side of our chest, about the size of your fist when it's normal size. As some people, their heart is more like the size of 2 fists because it has become flaccid and weak. But for the vast majority of you, it's about the size of your fist. That pump, remember I gave a talk on this the other night on heart disease, those of you who are here. Do you remember how many times that pump cycles in 1 year? Anyway, it was something like 3 million. It's like something like 3 million times in a year's time that your heart beats. And each time it beats, it has 2 different pressures. In fact, it's so much like I'm looking at my friend here because I'm thinking I may be wrong. But any of you in this audience, mostly men, who are acquainted with mechanical things will see that the heart is very much like a mechanical device. So when it squeezes down and produces pressure, that's when the blood pressure reaches its highest point. That's where the muscle works its hardest, is just as it is squeezing that blood out. And then it has check valves, 2 sets of check valves, so as it relaxes, the blood cannot come back in that it just pushed out. It has to come in from the venous system. And so it comes into there, and at that point, it's at its lowest pressure, right? Because the blood has just gone into the heart and filled it up. So that's the 2 blood pressure measurements we get on you, right? We call it a systolic. That's the highest number. We put that over top, and then underneath we put the diastolic. And what that really basically means is systolic is when it's compressing, and diastolic is when it's between. And if you were to map the blood pressure, like suppose you had a Doppler or something that could show your blood flow, you would see it cycles like this, right? That's what you would expect. I mean, we think oftentimes of our blood just flowing smoothly along, but it's actually moving in pulses. In fact, I don't think we showed that video, but one of the Complete Health Improvement videos has an actual image they took of the hamster's cheek, what would you call it? No, not bones. Anyway, the little pouch. Because in a hamster, the pouch skin is very thin, and they could actually see the red blood cells passing through the vessels in the walls of this cheek. Anyway, and they move along, just like I said, this little jumps. All right. So where does that blood go when it goes out of your heart, when it compresses? Well, in a way, you're right, but not really, because it's going to go. How long does your heart compress before it relaxes, approximately? About a second. Yeah, it's less than a second. If you had a heart rate of 60 beats a minute, it would be a second, but most of you actually had closer to 70 to 80. So you don't even have a second for that heart to compress and let go. So what happens is, as it comes out of the heart, it goes into an elastic vessel that expands. And it has smooth muscle in it, your artery. This is the aortic artery. And it expands. And then it contracts back while the heart is now filling up with blood. So your heart is not just a little simple pump up there in your chest that just, there's a system, there's an amazing system, your cardiovascular system. So the vessels are very important. Now, at some point you're going to be thinking here, well, why is he boring us with all this information? Well, it's not useless. The most common problem, or I don't want to say the most because I'm not a cardiologist, but a very common problem in our circulatory system has to do with the large vessels getting stiff, losing their elasticity. So what would happen? Just think about this. If you had a pump that was squeezing down like your heart, pushing blood out, or fluid out into a elastic vessel, and then somebody came along, just imagine, they came along and they put a metal band around it so it couldn't really expand. So now what's going to happen to the heart when it tries to pump? It's going to, it may not be able to pump very much blood out, and if it does, it'll have to be at high pressure. So now what am I doing to my heart muscle? I'm making my heart work much harder. It's got to push now, and so my systolic pressure might go up to 170 or 180, 200. And so I'm really making my heart work harder. Now why? Okay, you probably don't have any problem agreeing with me. That's probably not ideal, but do you realize what you've just done? What is a heart attack? Heart attack is when there's a lack of adequate blood flow to the heart muscle, right? Well, you can cause that to happen just by making it have to push so hard on pressure. You see what I'm saying? It could be that because when you work harder, you breathe harder, right? Well, your heart's the same way. When that muscle works harder, it takes more blood flow, more oxygen. And so I'm hoping that I'm helping you grasp that the hypertension isn't just about getting a blood pressure measurement on your arm. It has to do with the health and the risk to your entire circulatory system, certainly the big vessels. Now, let me just finish the rest of that picture for you. So after the large vessels, they expand when my heart contracts, and then when my heart relaxes, they continue to shrink, push the blood through the body. Okay, and so at some point, I remember before I was a physician and took training, I liked to talk about physiology, and I had read quite a bit, but I didn't know as much as a doctor. Now I know more, but I used to wonder, well, where does the vessel go from being an artery to being a vein? You know, it's a closed system, so where does that happen? Well, there's actually an answer to that question. But anyway, the point is, by the time these vessels, capillaries, they like to say in England, I usually call them capillaries, but at any rate, when they get down to so small that a red blood cell is bigger than they are. The red blood cells fold to go through some of these tiny capillaries. And so you begin to start to realize, I think, wow, if I start to get stuff on the sides of my vessels and make them narrower, I'm going to actually lose circulation to some parts of my tissues. And what's really interesting is, where are the tiniest capillaries? Are they in my aorta? No, it's in the ear hairs, it's in the eyes, it's in the kidneys, it's where some of the most delicate organs in your body. So when we start to lose circulation, it oftentimes affects these organs first, before you ever actually realize that you're having a problem with your cardiovascular system. You may actually start having issues with hearing or with sight or whatever. For example, do you all know what is the most common cause in the first world of macular degeneration? You know what this is, right? This is where you lose eyesight and the fovea, the focus. So when I look straight at you, I can't see, really, I can see the peripheral, but I can't. Anyway, what is the primary cause of that? It's a vascular disease. It's a problem with circulation. So anyway, and we're having way too much of it in America. Okay, I think that's probably enough of I just wanted to give you some physiology and anatomy background, because it's really great, but they don't go quite as much into that, I think. And I'm one of these people that, remember what I told you? I don't know, maybe you're not like me, but I'm one of these people that I don't like memorizing stuff. I like understanding stuff, and then you can figure it out what you need. Figure that out from what you know. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and show the video lecture, and then we'll have some questions and answer period. Okay. I hope you're getting a feel for the Complete Health Improvement Program videos and see why this might be a really fun way to have a health program. Okay. Is it working? No. All right. Oops, sorry.
This hose is a lot like your blood vessels. Just like the function of the hose is to direct the flow of water to the places that need it, in this case the garden, our blood vessels are there to direct the flow of blood to the outermost parts of our body that also need it for health and healing. However, elements of our lifestyle, particularly our diet and our stress levels, can cause the pressure in our blood vessels to increase. It's kind of like me putting my hand over the end of this hose. And as I do that, the pressure can increase on the inside, and it can cause all sorts of problems. For example, it can actually damage the blood vessels. As you can see, as I put my finger over, the pressure can actually cause a kind of leaking. And we call that leaking on the inside an aneurysm, and obviously that's life-threatening. But there are other things that high blood pressure can damage as well, including our brains, our kidneys, our eyes, and of course our heart. In this session, we learn what we can do to keep the pressure down.
Are you ready for another story? This is a story of one of my dear colleagues who at a young age had to face a harsh reality. "No," he cried, "that only happens to old people. No, I'm barely 18. How can I be paralyzed? How could I have a massive stroke?" Well, his parents had lived through the Great Depression, and they had vowed that their children would never suffer like they did. And so they provided well. And after 47 years, here's what Dr. John McDougall describes it now in his most recent book. "I grew up eating bacon and eggs for breakfast, sandwiches stuffed with meat and slathered with mayonnaise for lunch, and beef, pork, and chicken at the center of the plate every night at dinner." Ironically, no one realized it then that the best food money could buy actually nearly killed me. He describes his recovery as slow and incomplete. And then he adds, "Even after 47 years, I still walk with a limp. a lifelong reminder of the path that led to my illness and then to my newfound health. High blood pressure is one of the big 4 risk factors for heart disease, along with smoking and cholesterol and diabetes. Why? Because it speeds artery clogging. And then high blood pressure is also the biggest risk factor for strokes, dreaded because of its crippling effects. And then high blood pressure also increases the risk of kidney disease. And here are some stats. A person with high blood pressure has increased the risk by 3 to 5 times for heart attack and heart failure, and is 8 times more likely to suffer from a stroke than a normal tensive person. So to show you how fast the stroke risk can go up, look at the difference here 20 systolic points can make. Going from blood pressure of 120 to 140 would double the likelihood of dying from a stroke or heart attack. But going from 120 to 160 would actually double that risk once more. It would actually then quadruple it. Since we now better understand the risk levels at various blood pressure points, we can see why the optimal blood pressure levels have been set at 120/80 or less. So, if 120/80 is ideal, then what is defined as the disease? Well, hypertension is really best defined on several readings at 140/90 and above. So anything above 140/90 is hypertension. It can be either number or both numbers, the systolic or the diastolic number. If one is at the level or higher, the definition kicks in. Now, if 120/80 is the optimal bookend, and 140/90 is the other bookend, then everything in between is called pre-hypertension. You know, these are the very people who want to do all they can in not becoming full-fledged hypertensives. Let's take a look at the American scene. Here, every second adult either has pre- or full-blown hypertension, both with an accelerated risk for cardiovascular disease. Here are the stats. Of the 65 million people with high blood pressure, 20 million don't even know they have it. And another 10 million try to get by without medications. And 35 million are on medications, yet only half of them will still take them as ordered after 6 months. While we don't fully understand the exact cause of essential hypertension, there are 6 very definite and understandable contributing factors, largely rooted in nutrition. Number 1, sodium or salt. Dr. Gleiberman studied 27 populations around the world and found a direct straight regression line powerfully connecting the salt intake and the blood pressure levels. Those societies and cultures with the lowest salt intake also had the lowest blood pressure, and those with the highest salt intake had the highest blood pressure. The higher the salt, the higher the blood pressure. These initial population studies were recently augmented with the famous InterMap global survey of salt consumption and the prevalence of hypertension. What was their conclusion? They said sodium chloride, commonly known as table salt, may be the number 1 contributing factor in hypertension. The authors point out that many pre-industrialized people, such as the Australian Aboriginals, tribes in New Guinea, and people in Samoa, Africa, and Central America actually consume very little sodium, generally less than 500 milligrams a day. And many of these societies are characterized by a total absence of hypertension, no high blood pressure. In contrast, people in industrialized nations consume between 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams of sodium a day, and hypertension has a huge presence. Here, interestingly enough, only a smidgen of today's sodium actually comes from the salt shaker. Close to 80% now comes from processed and packaged food and from restaurant meals. Well, what actually happens to all that ingested salt? Well, when we eat more salt than our kidneys were designed to cope with, then excessive sodium accumulates like a toxic waste that must be diluted before our bodies can handle it. So, we begin to retain water, lots of it, At the same time, our blood pressure goes up as it tries to shove all that extra salt water through the kidney filters. These poor, overworked kidneys often diminish and wear thin in their ability as a sophisticated filtration system in time. And all too often, they may eventually lose their ability to function normally. So, point number one then is, let's be careful about sodium and salt when it comes to understanding essential hypertension. Point number two, arterial plaque. You know, the buildup of atherosclerosis contributes to high blood pressure problems. Plaques have infiltrated our blood supply lines, inflammatory processes have emerged, and the arterial walls begin to harden. As these plaques now build up, they restrict the free flow through our arteries. And as a result, our blood pressure goes up in an effort to help us push the blood through these narrowed arteries. So we have to do something about salt. We have to do something about atherosclerosis. We have to do something about number three, overweight. Because overweight directly contributes to the high blood pressure problem. As a matter of fact, obese people are 5 times more likely to have hypertension. And most of them will eventually experience high blood pressure. It's just a matter of time. So now we come to number 4, exercise. Exercise will not only help with the daily calorie balance, but it will also lower peripheral vascular resistance in your arteries, which facilitates blood to flow with greater ease. So build that into your daily program. That brings us to number 5. What about alcohol? Well, when it comes to bringing blood pressure and overweight levels down, alcohol is really contraindicated. When it comes to hypertension, alcohol, I think the least is best. And that brings us to our last point. Point number 6, sufficient potassium. You know, potassium is readily found in fresh fruits and vegetables. To bring down high blood pressures, we recommend 9 fruits and vegetables a day. That's right. It's the potassium that has been shown as an important teammate in battling hypertension. And it does it most effectively by counteracting the effect of sodium. Did you notice that every one of these 6 factors is under our control and jurisdiction? Here are 3 research reports to show how effective these principles can be in lowering blood pressure. Here's study number 1. The Predicate Longevity Center in Miami brings people in for 4 weeks. They come in to a beautiful place, they enjoy some education, follow a very simple diet to exercise, and the foods they have are very low in sodium, less than 1,500 milligrams a day. Very low in fat, less than 10%, and rich in fiber, and they have plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains and legumes, plus a modest amount of meat. And here are the results of 216 hypertensive patients who had been admitted to the center on medication for high blood pressure for at least 2 years. When they were discharged at the end of the 4-week program, 180 of these 216 patients, or 83%, were now normotensive. They had normal blood pressure, and they were no longer in need of any medication. And that brings us to study number 2, the famous DASH program, which also stands for the Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. This program has been an unmitigated success in the treatment of hypertension from its very first publication in 1997 in the New England Journal of Medicine. 2 years earlier, funded by the National Institutes of Health, the DASH group screened over 8,000 some men and women. Out of these over 8,000 people, they enrolled 459 with hypertension below 160 and below 95 and not yet on medication. These participants then joined a unique 8-week feeding experiment with 3 groups. Number 1 group was the control group. They received the regular American diet. Number 2 was the high potassium diet. This is a diet that's largely centered on fruits and vegetables. And then the number 3 group was what they call the combination diet, centered on fruits and vegetables, plus plenty of whole grains, very low-fat dairy, legumes, and some nuts. And minimal animal products. And what they tried to do at this study, they kept the weight and the salt constant. They wanted to see if the change in diet made the difference rather than any weight change or sodium change. And here are the results. They had 133 hypertensives, and they looked at their blood pressures very carefully over the 8-week program, and they found that they were able to lower their systolic blood pressure by 11 points and their diastolic blood pressure by 6 points almost. And they said, quote, "This outcome is similar in magnitude to that observed in trials when patients receive one medication for high blood pressure. It is well suited for the prevention and for the treatment of hypertension." This is now the second study that shows that we can do something with non-medication approaches. And now let me take you to study number 3, the CHIP success formula. Of course, you know the program: whole foods, largely plant-based, very low in fat and sugar, and very low in salt, of course. And we push more fiber. And of course, we are also very, very careful with alcohol. And here are the results. Out of over 5,000 CHIP graduates, 454 enrolled with systolic blood pressures above 160. And here's what happened to them. At the end of the 4-week program, this high-risk group had been able to drop their average blood pressure by 23 points. The systolic blood pressures came down 23 points. Similarly, 210 enrolled with diastolic blood pressures of over 100. What happened to them? At the end of the 4-week program, this high-risk group had dropped their average diastolic blood pressure by 18 points. And at the same time, only 69 out of the original 210, or 33%, had to remain in this high-risk category. That's good news. That means we can do our part as we work with our physicians and work together to bring these blood pressures down. Now let's summarize. We have learned that there are things that we can do to lower blood pressures and to prevent them from going up. Number 1, reduce sodium to less than 1,500 milligrams a day. Number 2, increase potassium-rich foods. Number 3, reduce cholesterol levels to open up our arteries. And then you have number 4, get rid of excess weight. Number 5, get physically active and fit. And number 6, and watch out for alcohol. These are the principles that will take the pressure off and keep it off. And whether we look at the clinical results from the Predicament Longevity Center, or the results of the DASH diet, or at our clinical CHIP results, studies have shown the tremendous impact that lifestyle can have on our blood pressure.
I was in the School of Health many, many eons ago, and we had an assignment to do for our class, which was to find out or determine the amount of protein in our own personal meals, and also actually in the meals of an omnivore, somebody who eats meat, vegetables, everything, in the meals of a vegetarian, in this case, somebody who doesn't eat meat but does eat milk and eggs. And also in the meals of a vegan, who would be somebody who's completely plant-based. The requirement for protein back in that day were 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. Nowadays, it's come down to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. A normal American male is about 60 kilograms, 70 kilograms. So that turns out to be about, say, no more than 60 grams of protein a day is needed. And that's the American USDA recommendation. In the US, we tend to shoot a little above what's required to make sure that everybody gets what they need, as we understand it. So I got a friend of mine, and I calculated the amount of protein he was eating. He was an omnivore. He ate meat. I calculated myself, back in that time I was a vegetarian as opposed to what I am now, more plant-based, but I was vegetarian. I ate milk and eggs, and I calculated the protein in my meals. And then I calculated, I had a friend who was a vegan, or completely plant-based. I calculated the protein in his meals. My results were, my friend who was an omnivore, who ate meat and fruits and vegetables and everything else, was getting 120 grams of protein a day, which is twice the amount that's recommended by the USDA. I, as a vegetarian, an ovo-lacto vegetarian, I was eating milk and eggs, but otherwise no meat. I was getting 90 grams of protein a day, okay, which is still over the amount that the USDA makes recommendations for. My friend who was completely plant-based, no meat, no milk, no eggs, was getting 60 grams of protein a day, right on the requirement or the recommendation by the USDA. So you can get your protein. There's no problem in a country like ours where we have the variety of foods that we have here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I was aware of what the recommendations were, but I did not know anyone who had actually used the food analyzer to look at the actual diets. I thought that was really interesting. All right, so we're going to now finish this video, which is going to be about protein, and then we're going to talk and take questions.
So what we've discovered is that plant-based foods are naturally low in sodium, and that's fantastic. But the question that's often asked is, are they also low in other nutrients that we actually need, such as protein? Well, perhaps we need to redirect that question to a 300-pound muscle-bound gorilla who essentially consumes these sorts of foods every meal. But can you? Can you achieve enough protein on plant-based diet? Well, let's take a closer look.
Do we get enough protein from a plant-based diet? Absolutely. Plant foods do contain plenty of protein. Most people you talk to would say no. It is a common misconception among consumers and health professionals that a plant-based diet cannot contain enough protein. Plant-based diet provides an appropriate level of total dietary protein, around 10% of total calories. That proportion exceeds the level required for most people. The word malnutrition caused by a protein deficiency is not even known to the vast number of countries, including Australia, Canada, and the United States of America, only where there are food shortages and starvation. Plant foods contain protein in different amounts. Legumes and nuts are particularly rich, but vegetables and whole grain cereals eaten throughout the day also contribute greatly to our protein intake. With some planning, and with that I mean buying and preparing a variety of foods, a plant-based diet can easily meet the recommended protein needs of adults and children. What is the role of protein? Proteins are a major structural component of muscle and other body tissues and are used to produce hormones, enzymes, and hemoglobin. An adequate dietary intake of protein is important for so many things, including essential for growth and repair of body cells, the normal function of muscles, transmission of nerve impulses, and immunity. Protein can also be used as energy, but is not the body's preferred energy source. So this occurs only when the amounts of carbohydrates and fats consumed are insufficient. And this can be an expense of tissue maintenance, growth and repair, and immune function. The body prefers to use carbohydrates and fat for energy. Burning carbohydrates for energy is like burning dried pine. It burns hot and fast. Burning fat is like burning hard wood, not as hot, but it burns longer. Burning protein is like burning car tires, and the body has a hard time mopping up the smoke and debris. Your kidneys have to work overtime to flush the toxins, and hence this is why high-protein diets can be so damaging. They do make you lose weight quickly, but it is in the form of the water that your kidneys excrete, trying to put out the toxic flames. How much protein do we need? We don't actually need as much protein as you may think. In fact, too much protein may also have negative effects. So how did our preoccupation with protein start? In the 1800s, Caldwell made the first recommendation on required protein, stating it was 120 grams per day. By 1905, research into protein had progressed, and Chittenden revised the requirement to 60 grams per day. By 1913, a Danish physiologist, Dr. Hein Hindi, had proposed the requirement of 40 grams per day. By 1920, the belief was we need only 35 grams. By 1955, it was proposed only 20 grams was needed. Currently, the World Health Organization recommends that a healthy adult should aim for 0.83 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which is about 62 grams for a man who is 75 kilograms and 50 grams of protein for a woman who is 60 kilograms. While over a century ago, it was believed that we all needed at least 120 grams of protein daily, today the recommendation suggests we need much less than this. And if enough calories are eaten as part of a varied plant-based diet, enough protein can also be consumed. How much protein does an average person consume today? Have a look at the breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and if you add up all these protein sources, it works out to be 140 grams of protein. In the more recent past, it was believed that specific plant foods needed to be combined at meals for their protein to be useful. We now know that if a wide range of plant foods are eaten across the day, the body is quite capable of efficiently using the protein they contain. Another reason plant foods are the optimal source of protein is because of the whole package you get while eating plant foods. Protein-rich whole plant foods are often a great source of fiber and contain a wide range of protective phytonutrients. Protein-rich animal foods, on the other hand, contain no fiber, no phytonutrients, and can also be high in unhealthy saturated fats, contain trans fats, and they contribute to cholesterol. Good plant-based sources of protein such as legumes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, and many more are also packed with an array of beneficial nutrients. Studies have shown high consumption of legumes to be related to a whole host of health benefits. A number of studies have shown high consumption of red and processed meats to be associated with a range of negative health effects. It is important that we look at the whole package of food. What do these people have in common? They are all world-class elite athletes, These athletes fill up and strive on beans, legumes, whole grains, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. When people hear a person is a vegetarian, the first thought being, where do you get your protein? It's so predictable. These athletes prove our bodies can function at their best by getting protein from sources other than meat and dairy products. While protein is vital to numerous functions, including muscle movement, repairing and making new cells, transporting oxygen in the blood, hormone functions, and fighting germs, a protein deficiency would, among other things, cause a loss of muscle mass, something not found in the best of class athletes. They report feeling and performing at their best and having more stamina, being more focused, and quicker recovery times between workouts. The myth, the more protein, the better, may be just that, a myth. Bypass the saturated fat and cholesterol found in meat and dairy products. Like these athletes, you can get your protein from eating adequate amounts of beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, vegetables, and fruits.
So two things. First, in a way of humor, I got out of that we should be eating hard firewood.
Burns a lot better in the stove than,
Exactly.
than pine.
Secondly, if you remember in the story of Daniel, when he asked to not eat the royal food, but just the fruits and vegetables, and in 10 days they looked stronger, they were healthier. So I think that's a good case for eating fruits and veggies.
Yeah, that's a good illustration. Yeah, because the things that were on the king's dainties, according to Daniel chapter 1, were a lot of animal-based foods. Okay. What I want to do is, well, first, if you have comments or questions about the video, so the hypertension material or the protein, you can answer those questions or discuss that. Okay. Yeah, we want the people to be able to hear your question.
One of the variables in having hypertension is too much cholesterol, but it didn't mention anything about if one has too much cholesterol, how would you go about lowering that cholesterol, unless that's a whole nother seminar.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, thank you. And it is very true that excessive cholesterol contributes to hypertension because we know it injures the vessel walls, and as I was saying, and Dr. Deal talked about it, even Dr. Morton, it was that when the vessel walls get stiff or blockages, makes the heart have to work harder. And cholesterol seems to, the best evidence we have is that the low-density lipoprotein cholesterol is one of the main culprits. But what's interesting about it is that there's also increasingly recognized an equivalent risk factor from the C-reactive protein, the inflammatory marker. So inflammation in our vessels, in our cardiovascular system, seems to be equally predictive of risk. And so it's more than just cholesterol, but it is certainly a big factor. Yes, sir?
Just one other thought. This was probably 40 or 50 years ago, but there was at least one Mr. America, the big muscle-building guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Anyway, he was a known vegetarian, and yet he became a Mr. America with all the muscles.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
And then how much protein, how much animals does an elephant eat every day that weighs 12,000 pounds?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else have a question? Yes, Rob, thank you. I saw that hand, and there was one over here somewhere.
So I had a question about when you if you ate a high sodium meal, sometimes it happens, it's like, oh, I don't want to throw it away, but boy, it has too salty, and I just choke it down anyway. And I know it affects you, but if you were generally normal in your blood pressure, how quickly would it go up and then come back down? I mean, how fast does your body rid it and come back to normal after one meal, say, of high sodium?
Yeah.
Kind of unbeknownst to you.
A very interesting question. I can't wait until somebody answers it. I don't know the answer to that question. It's a very reasonable question. I'm sure, though, that the answer has a lot to do with how well hydrated we are. And so, because the kidneys are going to flush out the extra sodium. That's their job in life. And so, but they're going to need to release water with the sodium. So that if you're dehydrated, they're going to not do it as quickly as if you are well hydrated. So, if I had that situation myself and I was concerned about wanting to get my sodium levels normal quickly, I would drink lots of water just to flush. But I don't know the answer. I believe it's within 24 hours. I don't think that you can take enough sodium in one meal that it's going to take more than 24 hours to normalize it. But I don't have a study to point to prove that. I think he wants to ask another question.
Yeah, well, I just had that. I felt like I had that happen to me yesterday because for lunch there was a meal that had this dish that was just extremely salty. And I went ahead and I was like, oh, I don't want to waste. I hate wasting food, so I ate it. But that evening, I had the highest blood pressure I had ever had. I think that I've ever recorded in a test.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. And I had retained, and I weighed more. I weighed more than I'd ever weighed before, and I had been thirsty all afternoon.
That's because that sodium is making your body retain fluid.
I had retained the water, plus I had my blood pressure had gone up in 6 hours. And I was like, boy, wow, how fast does it come down? I was wondering.
Well, next time you'll have to take blood pressures every hour and find out.
Yeah.
Good, interesting point. Okay. Oh, over here. Yes. Kathy.
This may have been shared, but I was still, and I just missed it, but do they say, or did you, how many grams of protein do we need? I know they say if you eat a plant-based diet, you'll be doing just fine. But do you have any definite parameters on that?
Yes. Well, the official position of WHO was mentioned there by Dr. Chung, which is 0.83 grams per kilogram. So it comes out to somewhere around 55 to 60. She said 50 for a woman weighing 132 pounds, or 62, I think, for a man. 165, man weighing, 165 pounds, yeah.
So do you agree with that pretty much?
Yes, because if the World Health Organization is addressing the entire world, so across the world, you see, I mean, in public health especially, but even as a physician, you realize that if you're going to make a recommendation that's going to work for everybody, it has to be broad enough to cover the unusual cases. So the best evidence is that a healthy person probably doesn't need more than 35 grams a day, male or female. But as you get older, it's true, absorption decreases, and so we start to recommend that older people eat more protein because absorption is less. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a very reasonable question, and I'm sorry the answer is a little wobbly, but that's just the way human nature is. Okay, over here's a hand.
So the question is, if there's a hypertension problem, you would start seeing it in your hearing and your eyesight. Is that correct?
I mentioned it, yes, in my remarks, and I think it was before these ladies arrived. But anyway, I was talking about that it's the tiny vessels that supply the blood to our finer organs, like the organ of Corti in the ears. That's the one that helps you have the balance and know which way you're leaning and so on. Yes. Well, I was using that as an illustration. And then there's the eyes and other. The places that are highly vascularized are the ones that seem to suffer earliest as we have problems with circulation. That's all I was trying to say. I cannot predict what a person's first symptoms will be, because for some people it's their chest, their heart. Some it's their brain, a stroke. Some it's kidney problems. So can't say exactly who's going to have what. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions about that? Yes, sir. He's going to bring that. He's going to bring that. Yes.
One of the most enlightening things I ever heard from a doctor like this was the fact that every living thing is made of protein. Every plant, every fruit, every vegetable, it's all made of protein.
Mm-hmm. Every
when I heard
living
that, I thought
thing.
that makes sense. I knew that, I didn't even think of it before. And so you can't be protein deficient on a vegan diet if you're getting sufficient food.
If you're getting sufficient calories.
It's all made of protein.
Yeah, that's been observed multiple times, and that's very true. If you are on a plant diet and you're getting sufficient calories to maintain a healthy weight, you will be getting sufficient protein. And I appreciate that soundbite. I don't know that I've ever heard that, but it is absolutely true, of course, that every living thing has protein. Because, right, but anyway, protein is the thing that our DNA codes for, right? Did you know your DNA genes don't code for carbohydrate? They don't code for protein. They code only for protein. And so that's as you say, anything that has DNA has protein, because that's what it's used to make. All right, anything else that comes to your mind? Can I ask you a couple of questions? Okay. So let me ask you about hypertension subject, at least one question, and that is, if you want to know what your blood pressure is, and how should you check that? Can you suppose you take one measure like Rob was saying, and he had last night, would that be a reliable measure of your blood pressure, one reading that's... Yeah, you need to take multiple measurements, and you don't have to do them all on the same day. It's wonderful. You could do them on multiple days if you wanted to. But in general, we look for 3 measures, okay? So, and why do we do that? Because it can fluctuate. This is what my bottom line, teaching point. I want you to realize that your blood pressure can fluctuate, and so if it seems too low or too high, take it again later. Not 15 minutes later, but next part, another day, or if you did it in the morning, do it later. Oh, that's another thing. When we do intensive lifestyle treatment programs, we have people with high blood pressure or people on medication for blood pressure, and we have them check their blood pressure every day because we want to see that it doesn't go too low. Well, we like to check at the same time of the day because your blood pressure does have some diurnal patterns to it, okay? It changes. So it's good if you're really tracking it, to try to take it at the same time of the day, more or less. All right. Anybody want to ask me a question? Because I'm going to ask you. Okay. Yes, Roger.
What is considered low blood pressure?
So what's considered low blood pressure? That's a great question because it's not a number. If you are in preschool or in elementary school, you will have a blood pressure that might be something like 80 or 90 over 60, and that's good. If you are 10 times that age, if you're in your 60s, and you have a blood pressure that's 90 over 60, you might very well be feeling faint. You might have trouble. You might fall. One of our biggest concerns about low blood pressure in elderly people is they tend to have brittle bones, and if they fall, they can break a hip or a bone, and that can be even more of a problem than the blood pressure. Yes?
I have a good physician friend who puts it, I'll put it in good language, as long as you can walk and urinate, your blood pressure is probably okay.
Yes, especially if you're otherwise healthy. I mean, if you don't know of any problems that you're having metabolically. Yeah, it's, another way I tell people, they come to me and they say, well, my blood pressure is such and such, and they're wondering if it's too low, and I say, well, what is it typically? Well, it's been like this for as long as I know. Okay, well then you're probably okay. This is normal for you. I mean, it can be too low. It is true. The blood pressure can get too low. But in general, if it's too low, you're going to have symptoms, is our bottom line. You're going to have faintness or syncope or whatever it might be. Okay. Did you have a question, Joe? Yeah, good. We'll wait for the...
I was just wondering, what do you recommend taking medication if your blood pressure is like 140 or above? Or?
So, okay, at what point would I recommend that a person start taking medicine? Right. And as opposed to what? Because are you, before you take his mic away, so what's my alternative? In other words, all right, well, I'll tell you what I do.
Mine was 148
Yeah.
last night, or when we took it the other day. But it's usually around 130 when I take it.
Yeah, well, thank you. This gives me 2 or 3 important teaching points. Thank you. So first thing I want to say before I forget it is that we now, it's been studied and published, and we know it's a fact, that people's blood pressure tends to be lower at home than in the doctor's office, okay? And it doesn't matter if the doctor's not there. The doctor can be on vacation, and it still works. You go to the doctor's office, and what I'm saying is true, but I'm trying to be a little humorous too. So it's not only the doctor. The nurse can do that too. We just tend to have a higher blood pressure. About 5 to 10 points is about all, though, typically. It's about that much. So the reason I'm sharing is if I have a patient that when I measure it in the office is say, 140 over 90, which is right at that threshold, then what I'm going to do before I put them on medicines, I'm going to say, Joe, can you take your blood pressure at home a few times for me and write it down, and then when you come, we'll see where you are. Because almost always you're going to be lower than that. Now, you may not be because this wasn't a doctor's office, and this may be the number that you have. But it sounded like what you said, that it tends to run lower. So I'm one of these, my personal preference is to, unless it gets, well, when it gets above 150, I will recommend strongly doing something besides changing your food. But if it's occasionally, if it's typically under, let's say 130, it's around 135, and occasionally it's 150, well, that's normal. I mean, blood pressure does go up and down. But the thing to do is to start tracking it. That's the best thing, is to get a record and just track your blood pressure for a couple weeks and see. Because sometimes we can fool ourselves. We think, well, I don't think it's usually this high. And then you come to find out, well, it is. And sometimes it's even higher than that. So a high blood pressure is a serious thing. I know when I was, even before I was a physician, we used to do health screenings at these like health fairs, and we would take blood pressures, and we were taught, and I now even as a physician, I agree with this. We were taught that if you run into a person, in a screening, and their blood pressure is over 160, you should recommend they see a professional soon, hopefully before they go home. So it's a serious matter. Anyway, okay, over here's another question. And then we're going to go and talk about protein.
Most of the time when you have to go to the doctor's office, you get worried, and then your blood pressure shoot out, right?
Sometimes, apparently. Sure, stress, right, all of these things. And for whatever it's worth, one of the ways that you can tell to some extent whether it's stress, blood pressure or not, is if the diastolic, the bottom number, is high, that's typically not stress. That's typically something more basic wrong. So as a physician, I consider an elevated diastolic more problematic than an occasionally elevated systolic. All right, that's probably enough detail about that. Let's talk just a little bit about the matter of protein. I want to ask you a question or two, and then I'm going to talk about how you're going to prepare for the blood test on the 30th. So let me ask you this question. Do you know what is the highest concentration of protein per calorie of any food? If you do, you're going to be an unusual person. Oh, if you my colleagues, don't answer. Let's let these people. Soy. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I thought you were saying so. Actually, no. No, it's amazing. So think about it a second. Now, it's a trick question, okay? But it's a teaching point. But it's a trick question. And the reason it's kind of tricky is because what did I say? The highest concentration of protein per calorie. So you might not be surprised that it's actually quite of a low-calorie food. And like our friend here, and I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry, Dale said, every living thing, including kale, has protein. Turns out that greens are some of the highest protein per calorie food there is because they're so low in calories, but they do have protein. And the reason that I use this little illustration is that it helps us. I don't think this audience has this fear, but many people, when they think about going on a plant diet or only plants, they just get worried about protein. And if they're not worried, their mama and their parents and their friends and the teachers will worry for them. So, but we should be more worried about having too much. The fact is, we have more problems in our country, in the first world especially, from having too much protein than not having enough. So just keep that in mind. And if you question me, which you should check everything, but check it out, and you're going to see that it's kale and similar leafy greens have more protein per calorie. But you'll have to eat an awful lot of kale to get all your protein needs. So it'd be good to have some soybeans once in a while. Okay. All right. Let's talk about, and I may call on Dr. Kathy to help me here a little bit, but what we wanted to do, we were talking today about, this is our last night. We're going to, of course, have withdrawal symptoms tomorrow. I'm sorry, but we have to go. We have to be in Crossville, Tennessee by sunset tomorrow. So, but we come back, and hopefully when we come back sometime, we can have fun again and have a meal, and Sally can actually make more than just samples. But what we want to do is, I want to focus on this one thought. We are arranging, well, I shouldn't take credit, I'm not doing it. Dr. Kathy and Dr. Carlos are the ones that are putting this together, the Irizaries, another blood draw for you, okay? And in my lifestyle medicine practice, I always get beginning and ending blood work because that's how we can show what's happened, right? And I want you to see that this is working. So that's what we want to do here. We want to give you a chance to see what's working. Now, so here's what I'm going to do. This is my sales pitch, if you will. I want to encourage you to apply as well, as thoroughly as you can, as consistently as you can, the things that we've learned, okay? Plant-based diet, plenty of fiber, right? The kind of dishes that she's been serving, you don't have to use hers, but it's a nice way to do it if you can, is to use some of these recipes until the 30th, at least. And then when you get your blood draw, you will be able to answer a question that I'm going to suggest to you is the most important thing, the most sensible thing for you to do right now. All right, so you've spent this time. Most of you have come all of these nights. You've taken time to come, and you're making some changes, or at least you're prepared to. Well, would it not make sense that this is a golden opportunity for you to find out how much impact this can make? I mean, I guess I suspect that every one of you, if you thought I could answer it, would ask me, well, how much difference is this going to make to me? And I can't, of course, answer that. But you can, because if you make these as diligently as you can between now and the 30th, you're going to get an answer to the question is, how does this work in my body, in my life? And then, like Daniel said to the gentleman, that he said, well, why don't you let us do this for 10 days and then you decide yourself. So that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to have you try this between now and the 30th, and then you decide. Because many of you will be surprised. You know, I've done a lot of health programs that were almost completely Seventh-day Adventist. Now, I know there's mostly Seventh-day Adventists here, but some maybe that are not. And what's interesting is that we tend to have better diet than the average American. That's been proven in studies that we have a healthier diet and live a little longer. But even though I have a treatment group, all Seventh-day Adventists, they still have amazing improvements. So that tells us that there's always some room for improvement. Yes, Dr. Kathy, did you want to share something?
I think it's absolutely imperative to see a difference, to make changes in the diet. But in addition, that bit of exercise after each meal is a wonderful changer.
Yes, thank you. You've learned more than just about recipes. That's right. We should use that postprandial, we call it stroll. You know, after the meal, you don't want to walk briskly. Okay, in a second, Rob. You don't want to walk briskly, but you do want to walk. In fact, I remember the first time one of my primary mentors as a lifestyle medicine physician, he said, it's funny because, you know, since I'm an old doctor, an old man and a young doctor, he was actually younger than me, but he had far more experience, and he showed me how to stroll. And I to this day, I struggle with it. He said, because I was thinking that, you know, we would walk, and next thing I know, he's way back there. I'm like, he says, no, John, you have to stroll. And that's a slow walk, you know. You have plenty of time to look at the flowers and the birds and the bees. But anyway, most of us walk too fast right after eating. It would be better to go slower. Okay, who's got that mic? Okay.
So you mentioned before about the A1C, but I don't believe that was on the blood panel, was it? Yes. It was? Okay, I guess I was. The CRP? Oh, not the A1C, but the CRP. That's the C-reactive protein.
Yes, it was not on the blood.
I was wondering why not, because that's, I mean, often I understand, but that's an inflammation marker that could be indicative of a lot of issues, or can we get that if we wanted to?
I'm going to let Carlos. I don't know that I can answer that. Can you answer that, Bunny?
We have a price set for the lab with the labs that we ordered that might add to it or it might not. We can find out about it. I would want to ask Dr. Kelly, is that something we want to check just randomly in terms of a screening?
Okay, so the primary value that I use the CRP for in my treatment program is another measure of reduced risk, another measure showing people that it's working. But as far as screening, I mean, typically we don't do it for screening because you wait, I mean, you see we only get it, I would say, most of us in the clinical setting in the face of elevated risk, and we're trying to stratify it more, right? But from the standpoint of seeing benefit from lifestyle change, yes, it does make sense. And most of the people that I get this on are not up in the high numbers. So anyway, I mean, I understand your question. It seems very reasonable. But this was, something that we just didn't include in the first one. And I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense to do it at the end only, because you don't have anything to compare it to. Go ahead. She wants to say something.
My understanding, and I could be incorrect, so correct me if it's, is that it is fairly non-specific, so it can send one down rabbit trails to do it just without any related symptoms. But maybe it would be helpful here. You've used it.
Yeah, no, if you wanted to offer it, I don't think there'd be any harm in doing that. But I don't think that it's, since we didn't do it the first time around, I don't personally see a big reason to do it right now. Here's the facts about it. LDL is highly correlated with risk of atherosclerosis. Okay, I'm especially hoping to get to answer your question, sir. It's highly correlated to risk of atherosclerosis and heart disease. It turns out, interestingly enough, that high sensitivity CRP, or what's often called cardiac CRP, is equally associated with risk, but independently of LDL, which is very, very interesting. It seems like they are measuring two different things that have relatively equivalent risk. So, but we don't have anyone in this group that was at extreme risk that would make us want to order that test for clinical reasons. We would be doing it strictly to help you track the fact that these lifestyle changes reduce both kinds of risk.
Isn't it a marker of inflammation, as I understand
It is. And as you said, it's non-specific, but it is very much correlated to atherosclerotic changes.
Sure.
Because atherosclerosis is an inflammatory condition.
And I don't know a whole lot about it except the path that my family has been on, with cancer and so forth. Knowing that there is an inflammation cascade that often contributes to that, knowing what our CRP was a beneficial score. I think trying to lower that is to lower the overall risk factor and so forth. So I just was thinking about not specifically of heart disease as just an overall general health and trying to lower the score, the better, I would assume. Because, it seems like with what autoimmune diseases and other things, there's so much having to do with this inflammatory. You hear it, I don't know, sometimes you're like, inflammatory this, inflammatory that, how much is it really? But you hear a lot about it, it seems, when you read things on health.
Yes.
That inflammatory system is really causing a lot of the problems.
It's true.
Osteoporosis, that sort of thing can be an inflammatory disease,
That's
supposedly.
True. It's true, yeah. And it may be that for you or some individuals, it might make sense to get a high sensitivity CRP test, whereas it might not be necessary for everyone. Anyway, those are very interesting points. All right, did you want to say anything more about this? Your point was well taken. I think that it's not just the food, although that's very important, but exercise, sleep. We've learned a lot of principles, and we would like you to apply as many as you are able between now and when you get your blood test. That's the bottom line. Do you have any questions? Yes, okay. There's a question over here, Lisa. I was telling somebody just recently, I said, just about the time that you guys and we part ways, I'm gonna know most of your names finally.
Speaking of reducing atherosclerosis, plaque in the arteries, as far as diet, I know that you said that the free oils are bad for you, that have been removed from the plant source, and that the whole food with the oil in it is not bad for you. But if somebody is, like, say, really needing to clear their arteries, would they need to reduce the higher fat plant foods for a while, or does that matter?
That's a really good question, Lisa. Thank you. And so I'm going to answer it with the experience of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. So Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn is from the Cleveland Clinic. I think Anne, his lovely wife, is, I think, the daughter of the founder of the clinic. But anyway, so he's there. He's been doing work with lifestyle change for patients who basically the cardiothoracic team has said, we've done all we can do. We can't give you any more stents. We can't give you any more bypasses. And so he started taking some of those patients that had nothing really much else option, and he put them on a very strict regimen, and he's strict. He does what you were just saying. There's no nuts, not just free oils. There's no nuts. There's, and he has had something like 90-some% success rate. These people that came to him that had a few months, they would basically said, you put your house in order. You probably will not have more than a few more months. Most of them have lived now almost 20 years and are healthier than some of their neighbors who got surgeries and had things done. So the answer to your question, I think, is yes. If you are really at the severe level of acute disease, you should go every inch, every millimeter. I know I would. If I knew that I was at the end of my rope for cardiovascular improvement from all the modern technology we have, I would definitely stop eating nuts and peanut butter, much as I love it, and I would go on Caldwell Esselstyn's program. We don't have any other program that I'm aware of in the world that has the success rate that he has with the most extreme conditions that he has. He says, it's funny if you've heard his talks or read his book, he talks about the one little sheep that wandered away and got heart disease again. But fortunately, they didn't die, and they went back into the fold. Anyway, yeah, it's somebody, I thought I heard this. All right, we'll take, right here. Since she's already asked the question, let's let her say it.
What would you do for low blood pressure?
For low blood pressure, well, that's an interesting question because immediately what comes to my mind is all the different things that might be causing low blood pressure, and they might be quite different. I'm just thinking, is there a viable answer I could give to that question? I really am not sure I can, because it would depend, as I say, is it an elderly person and are they feeling faint, or is it? But I will say this much about blood pressure, is we know that low blood pressure can cause insufficient perfusion. That's why you get faint, is you don't get enough blood flow to the brain, right, when your blood pressure is too low. So this is an actual experience that happened to me while I was in medical school. I was visiting my mother, and she was having vision changes. She couldn't see like she was supposed to, and I was fresh in medical school, so I thought she's having a TIA. And so I had her, and her blood pressure wasn't like it should be. We took her blood pressure anyway, so I had her lay down. So if I was dealing with acute low blood pressure, I would have the person lay down. I would have them maybe even put their feet up. I would have them, drink some fluids. But I know that's not what you're talking about, not acute. You're probably talking about chronic. So if a person has chronic low blood pressure, I would probably see a doctor. Well, and that would mean, it could be me, but my point is, you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing talk to you about your medical history, your situation. Why are you having this blood pressure? Now, but we'll work this a little bit further. We can get some more lessons out of it. So suppose that they're having low blood pressure on the diastolic, but the systolic is not too low. Well, now we know we've got something going on here. Most likely it's some pretty stiff blood vessels, and that may take some. You see what I'm saying? Remember when I said that when the aorta got stiff, the systolic would be higher, but sometimes it can be higher, and because the blood flow is so poor, the diastolic can be lower. So, but you get to see that there's a reason that we spend 7 years in training and before we can start practicing. But anyway, it's a very interesting question. I'm sorry I don't have a more specific answer. Yeah, it's complicated. Who's next? Oh, okay. Matthew.
How much olive oil is too much?
It depends on how serious your disease is. If you are a healthy, active, young person, I'm not sure that you need to worry about having some olive oil in moderation whenever you care to. I use a very key word, right? Moderation. But if you are fighting atherosclerosis, if you're having strokes or TIA, any kind of acute, definite circulatory issues, you should have none. Because we know for a fact from studies that have been done, brachial artery response testing, that you eat even the most healthy virgin olive oil and it will change how reactive your blood vessels are to dilating in response to nitrous oxide. And so you're basically making your blood vessels unable to respond as they should to provide circulation. So that could kill you. Does that help? I didn't think it would. Okay, we're coming back to you in a minute. All right, she's got it, and then you.
Do you have any recommendations on GMO food versus non-GMO food? I know that's a whole can of worms, but
that's for next week. No, all right, I will go to there, but let's go ahead and you can stop here on the way, and then he's got while you're going here. That is like a hot topic in many areas, so I won't say a lot, but I'll say a couple of things.
When you were talking about when you have like serious cholesterol and you're avoiding nuts and things like that, does that also include avocados?
Well, avocado we don't think of as a nut.
I know, but the oils.
Okay, I understand. It's high in fat.
Right.
That's true. So anyway, like Dr. Esselstyn does not forbid. Yeah, he doesn't forbid the use of avocados. Avocado is a very interesting. Yes, it's higher fat food, but it's actually a kind of watery. It's more. It's got a lot of aqueous aspect to it. It's not just oil like nuts are. I mean, nuts are most of the calories from fat. Matthew, I think, had something more he wanted to say, or maybe not.
So you should just probably have the date. I don't even know what to say. Not more than like 2 teaspoons a day, 2 tablespoons a day.
I would do, if I was you, I'd just do some reading and come to your conclusion. I don't think you're going to find any doctor's going to prescribe to you a certain amount. We put some oil in our loaf of bread. I think, what do we put a tablespoon, teaspoon? So you probably aren't, looking at you and knowing your BMI, you're probably not hurting a bit. So you can have some more oil. All right. I'm out of time, so I am gonna say 2 things though about Catherine's question about GMO. Here's the thing I want to say. Oh wow, we're having some serious rain, sounds like. All right. The fact is, I think there's 2 facts you should be aware of, okay? This is said to try and tamp down some of the hype, okay? Because there's a lot of hype about this. But there's also some reality. And put this in context, I studied immunology in college, studied virology, I studied genetic modification. My minor was in molecular biology. I have done in college myself the genetic manipulation. So this is not a lay or an uninformed, okay? But and here's the 2 things I think that are important that we should be aware of. Before CRISPR, now CRISPR is a new technology that allows them to put DNA exactly where they want it in the genome. That's a fantastic and wonderful development as far as being able to accurately modify DNA. Before that, which is the way we created almost all of the plant foods that are genetically modified, we didn't have the ability to do that. We call it a shotgun approach. We would basically use electrostimulation on a solution that was filled with the cells that we wanted to modify, and it would cause the cells some of them to take up plasmids, which are little circles of DNA that we wanted to get into the cell. And then the ones that survived, we would test to see if they had the plasmid, and if they did, then that's success. We had no idea where it was going into the genome. And now we know that the genome is full of DNA, of epigenetic switches. So we know now that we created a number of things other than what we were aiming for. So I think that if you're a thinking person, that ought to be enough to help you understand why genetically modified foods the old way can have unintended consequences. And that's enough. I don't have time to go any further. But if you are interested in knowing more, I do have a repository of scientific publications about the subject. And if you email me, because all of you should have, that I have an email for, should have already received your handouts, and so you should have my email. All right, well, thank you. It's been a real, okay. I'll let this young lady over here have the last word.
There's this new little device called the air fryer. What does that do to food?
Give that microphone to that lady over there. Well, okay, so air fryers, you think about what they are, right? It's a device that doesn't it? It puts hot air on the food. And so there's a few things I like about it. I've eaten some air-fried food, and I thought it was enjoyable. But anyway, my biggest concern is that sometimes I'm thinking, is there any harm? And the only harm I know is if it seems to me that if you cook food with hot air to the point that it burns it, we know that there's something called AGEs and some other things that are chemicals that are not good for us that are produced when we burn food. And so but I think a hot air cooker or fryer or whatever they call it it's a good idea. I think if you handle it right. Okay, now I got Sally ready to go.
The only thing that I was going to say was I've had friends that had one and they served food. There wasn't a single one of them that didn't put oil. They put the food in oil, shook it up so it was coated, and then they air fried it. So I still was getting fried oil, and I didn't want fried oil.
Well, thank you. That's a great point. Because our whole idea of using an air fryer is to get away from the oil. And you don't need it. It does change the flavor. Microwave? You're saying... Okay, so she's wanting to ask about what microwave. You know, we're on other people's nickel now. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and answer that. Sally, you can tell, I hope, I really love her, and she's amazing. But she says some very remarkable things sometimes. Like she calls the microwave to nuke it. There's no nuclear radiation coming out of the electromagnetic radiation associated with microwaves. That doesn't mean they aren't harmful, but it's not nuking it. But anyway, but where we are is we prefer other more natural means of cooking and heating food when it's possible. But when I continue to eat microwaved food, my concern about it is that I know from reading and from personal experience that the way that the microwave heats the food is it actually produces a radiation that is absorbed by hydrogen bonds, basically. And so the water in the substance that you're heating provides the thing that will absorb the heat. So it basically heats the water inside the food or whatever it is. And so you can, and it heats it at a very high temperature. I mean, the water molecules get hotter than boiling. And so it's sort of a high temperature cooking, shall we say. And, but anyway, I'll tell you my pet peeve about microwaves. Okay, so you asked for it. My peeve is, why are we cooking food in the microwave with plastic, knowing that the microwaves cause the plastic molecules to get into the food? I've got more than enough plasticizers in my body without cooking it in my own kitchen. So anyway, okay, we'll end there. Anything? Yeah, I agree with you. That's a really good way.
I'm going to say just a few things, and I want to ask Sally to come up here with Dr. Kelly.
Oh, I know what you're doing. You don't need to do this.
Well, let me do it quick. First of all, on the 30th, we're going to be drawing blood for those of you who are interested, and we're going to try to set something up so that we can get everybody together again for a group looking at your results and seeing how you've progressed. So we will let you know about that because we got to put it together. It may be on Zoom. The last thing I want to say is, how many of you appreciate Dr. John and Sally Kelly? they travel around doing this, not asking for anything. It's in their hearts, you know, and so that's just something you don't see all the time. We're very grateful. We're grateful for all of you coming here every night. I want to give this card to them, okay, and just ask them to take it out and look at it. It's not sealed. Only half of what they're going to get is in that card, but it may be the most important part, and it's just, you all signed it just to express appreciation. If anybody has not signed it and wants to, you'll have time to do that afterwards. So
this is special. Thank you. I had no idea you were doing this.
Thank you so much. We will close now and let you have a chance to visit. And why don't we have a prayer to close with? Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we are so grateful for your blessings to us. You have given us food. You've given us bodies to exercise. You've given us fresh water. And not only that, but you've given us teachers who can instruct us and guide us in the best way to use these things. So we want to express our gratitude to you for this. Please be with every single person here. Please bless us and help us to make the changes that you want us to make in our lives. Be with each one. Keep each one safe on the way home today. And again, we thank you for your blessings. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
And I do too. I need to, while you're getting her the microphone, we have stayed with a couple of the nicest people you're ever going to meet for the last few days. And we just want to thank them, the Irizaris, for being our host and hostess.
Yes.
Yes, please.
I think you can see clearly that it was our privilege. If there are those of you who have not signed up to have your blood tested again, make sure you talk to me. We have to have you on the list. It will be 2 weeks from last night, which is the 30th. It will be here, right here, from 4:30 to 6:30. You have to come during that time, because if you don't, there won't be anybody here to take your blood. That's it.